Pause for a second. Not to think, not to analyze, just to notice that tiny space inside you where everything becomes quiet, that still point behind your thoughts. Most people overlook it because the world has trained them to look everywhere except within. But the truth is simple. If you miss that inner space, you miss the most important part of your life. Because that quiet place is where your real awareness lives. And that is where this story begins, not with angels, archons, or ancient books, but with something far closer, the part of you that has been whispering for years, hoping you'd finally listen. Today's topic is uncomfortable for the world and comforting for the soul. We're going to explore a question most people avoid. What if the God we were told to worship was never the true source at all? And what if the real source is quietly watching you through your own eyes? Let's start by facing a challenge humanity has carried for thousands of years. Since childhood, many of us were taught that the ultimate power sits somewhere in the sky. A distant ruler, a judge, a lawgiver. Follow the rules, behave, pray correctly, obey or be punished. Even if you weren't raised in a religious household, you still grew up in systems built on the same idea. Someone out there has authority over you. Governments, institutions, leaders, experts, everyone telling you who you should be and what you should believe. It's subtle, but it shapes how you live. You start carrying the belief that meaning must come from outside, that safety must come from outside, that truth must come from outside. And without realizing it, you slowly forget how powerful you truly are. This is the first problem. We were conditioned to search outward for what has always lived inward. So let's explore how this conditioning happened, not through dogma or conspiracy, but through a quiet distortion of human perception. Because sometimes the greatest traps don't need chains, they just need stories we never question. The ancient pattern of giving away power. Long before modern religion, humans faced forces they couldn't explain. Thunder, storms, earthquakes, the death of loved ones. Naturally, they created stories to understand it all. A god above, a ruler watching, a judge to appease. Over time, these ideas became institutions, and institutions became authorities. And once authority exists, it rarely gives up power willingly. For centuries, people were told, "You don't know enough. You're not pure enough. You're not worthy enough. Let us speak to God for you." Do you see the pattern? Whenever humanity forgot its own inner connection, someone else stepped in to control the narrative. And history is filled with the results. Wars fought in the name of heaven. Books burnt because they challenged the structure. Thinkers silenced because they encouraged people to look within. Communities punished for questioning the official story. Even today, you see the modern forms of the same thing. The world distracts you with noise, so you forget who you are without it. Why? Because a human being who knows their own inner power becomes very difficult to control. And this brings us to the heart of the script, the quiet warfare happening inside every person. It is not a battle between good and evil in the dramatic sense. It is a battle between awareness and illusion, between your higher nature trying to rise and the old programming trying to hold you down. Let's understand that programming. The matrix of perception. A long time ago, certain mystics, later called the Gnostics, described something remarkable. They said, humanity is not trapped by chains, but by perception itself. To them, the world wasn't simply physical. It was a kind of mental realm, shaped by what the mind pays attention to. And the tragedy was that most people lived through inherited beliefs, not their own direct experience. They spoke of forces, not monsters or demons, but patterns that distort human perception. For simplicity, let's call these patterns the old programs. The program that tells you you're not enough. The program that says happiness comes from approval. The program that makes you doubt your intuition. The program that tells you to fear the unknown. The program that keeps you desperate for validation. These patterns thrive when you forget your inner connection. They strengthen every time you react from fear instead of presence. So the real question becomes, who are you without the programs? Who are you beneath all the noise? The Gnostics answered, you are a fragment of the infinite source, not a servant, not a sinner, not a mistake, a spark of the same awareness that breathes through the entire universe. And once you remember this, the illusion begins to lose its strength. But remembering is not easy. We have to understand how forgetting works, how the illusion shapes your inner world. Think about a newborn. Before learning any language, religion, or rules, it exists in pure awareness. There is no fear of judgment, no sense of separation, no shame, no limitations. Then the world begins to speak. You must earn love. You must obey to fit in. You must compare yourself. You must doubt anything that cannot be measured. You must fear what you cannot see. Slowly, the inner light dims, not because it becomes weaker, but because the mind becomes crowded with noise. You learn to trust your thoughts more than your awareness. You learn to chase approval more than inner clarity. You learn to feel small in a world that benefits from your smallness. And by adulthood, most people don't remember the last time they felt connected to that pure state of being. They don't remember because they were trained to forget. But the forgetting is not total. Something remains. A strange restlessness. A quiet loneliness, even in a crowded room. A pull towards something you can't describe. A feeling that the life you're living is not the whole story. That restlessness is your true self trying to wake up. So let's go further into this inner awakening. The moment you look within, there comes a moment in life, sometimes triggered by heartbreak, silence, meditation, or a sudden insight when everything stops. Your mind softens. Your breathing slows. You're not thinking about the past or the future. You're just there. In that instant, something becomes clear. You are the one noticing the thoughts. You are the one noticing the emotions. You are the one witnessing the entire experience. If you are the one observing everything, then you cannot be the thoughts, the fears, the doubts, or the memories. You are the awareness behind them. And that awareness does not age, does not break, does not belong to any religion, does not need permission from any authority. It simply exists, silent, unmoving. Every spiritual tradition tried to describe this inner presence, but words always fall short. That's why parables, metaphors, and stories were used. Not to mystify it, but to bypass the mind. Because truth enters you through experience, not logic. And when this presence becomes clearer, something shifts. You begin to see that happiness isn't something to chase. It rises naturally from stillness. You realize that clarity isn't found in more thinking. It comes from quiet observation. And you see that love isn't something to earn. It flows when you stop resisting what you are. But how do we move from occasional glimpses to lasting awareness? Let's talk about the emotional challenge at the center of awakening. The emotional trap, fear of losing identity. Most people don't awaken because they're afraid of what they'll lose. Not material things' identity. The mind loves its stories. My achievements define me. My failures define me. My trauma defines me. My opinions define me. My religion defines me. My past defines me. But awareness is not defined by any of these. And letting go of identity feels like stepping into emptiness. This is why awakening can feel unsettling. The familiar dissolves. The internal stories begin to crumble. The mind feels exposed, almost naked. You might think, who am I without my past? Without my labels? Without the narrative I've carried for so long? And the answer is surprising. You are far more than the mind's version of you. What dissolves is not your life. It's the illusion that you ever needed a story to exist. Awakening doesn't erase you. It reveals you. The true you, quiet, aware, present, is always here. Now, let's move into the practical steps you can begin today to reconnect with that presence. The path back inward, practical steps. These aren't rituals, not beliefs, not doctrines, just practices that help you experience your own awareness directly. The 60-second stillness. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, breathe naturally, and for 1 minute, instead of trying to calm your thoughts, just watch them, like clouds in the sky coming and going. Notice the space in which they appear. That space is you. The witness shift. Once or twice today, stop and ask, who is noticing this moment? Ask it softly, gently. You'll feel a slight shift inside. It pulls you out of the mind and into awareness. The inner sense practice. Bring your attention to the center of your chest or forehead, not to visualize anything, but to feel the presence behind the sensation. It's subtle at first, but with time it becomes unmistakable. Releasing the old programs. Every time a fear-based thought appears, I'm not enough, I'll fail, no one will understand. Pause and say, this is a program. It is not me. You don't have to fight it. Just recognizing it weakens its influence. A moment of inner honesty. Before sleep, ask yourself, what part of me did I ignore today? You might uncover a truth you've been avoiding. Awakening is not about perfection. It's about gentleness, about remembering, about turning toward yourself rather than away. Which brings us to the closing of part 1. Everything you seek, clarity, peace, meaning, has always lived inside you. Not in a book, not in a temple, not in a system, not in the sky. Within you, because the true source was never separate. It was never above. It never belonged to any authority. It has always been the quiet presence behind your own eyes. Part 2 will show how this inner remembering grows into real transformation, how awakening changes relationships, intuition, manifestation, and daily life. But for now, ask yourself this: if the real source lives within me, why am I still looking outside for answers? Take a slow breath. Feel the air moving in and out. In part 1, we explored a simple yet uncomfortable possibility that the true source is not a ruler in the sky, but the silent awareness inside you. We saw how stories of an external God, an external authority, an external salvation have slowly trained humanity to forget this inner connection. We also touched the first steps of returning through stillness, witnessing, and honest observation. Now, in part 2, we're going to bring this inner realization into daily life. Because awareness that never touches your relationships, your work, your emotions, and your choices remains theory. The real shift begins when you move through the world differently, not as a frightened, separate self trying to survive, but as a conscious expression of the source, awake inside the matrix instead of lost in it. Let's begin with a question most people carry in secret. If I begin to awaken, what happens to my normal life? The fear of changing too much. A lot of people feel a strange pull toward inner work, but stop themselves because of hidden fears. What if I become disconnected from my family? What if my friends think I've gone crazy? What if I can't function in their real world anymore? What if I lose my ambition, my drive, my goals? These fears are understandable. The ego hears the word awakening and thinks, I'm going to be replaced or erased. So it resists. It creates doubt, distraction, even physical fatigue when you sit to meditate. But here's the paradox. True awakening doesn't erase who you are. It removes what you are not. What falls away is not your love for your family, your talent, your personality, or your passion. What falls away is the constant fear, the heavy guilt, the compulsive need to prove yourself, the false stories that make you suffer. You don't lose yourself. You lose the cage around yourself. And that sets the stage for a very different way of living. To understand this fully, let's look at 3 key areas: how awakening changes your relationships, your perception, and your choices. 1. Relationships, from control to present. Most relationships in this world are built on unconscious agreements. I'll play the role you expect if you play the role I expect. I'll hide my true feelings if you hide yours. I'll confirm your story about reality if you confirm mine. When someone begins to wake up, these agreements start to crack. You begin to notice where you were pretending. You notice how often you said yes when you meant no. You notice how much of your identity was built around being accepted. At first, this can create tension. Some people around you might feel unsettled because your presence starts to act like a mirror. You stop playing small. You stop feeding drama. You stop confirming lies. Instead of reacting from old wounds, you pause. You feel. You respond from awareness, not from habit. Over time, something beautiful happens. Some relationships fall away naturally, not through hatred, but through misalignment. They simply no longer match your inner state. Others deepen beyond anything you knew before. Because when you meet someone from awareness, you meet them beyond masks. You listen without waiting to reply. You speak without twisting the truth. You forgive without secretly keeping score. This doesn't mean you become passive. In fact, you become more honest. You can say, "This is not okay for me," without aggression. You can say, "I love you," without fear of losing power. You can say, "I don't know," without shame. Awakening doesn't mean withdrawing from people. It means relating from a deeper place. The Gnostics spoke of the spark in each being a fragment of the monad present in every soul. When you begin to see that spark in yourself, you start to see it in others. Even in the difficult ones. Even in those who hurt you. Even in those lost in their own illusions. You may not accept their behavior, but you understand the confusion driving it. And from that understanding, compassion grows not as a rule, but as a natural response. Now, let's look at how your perception itself begins to shift. 2. Perception. Seeing through the matrix. Scientists who study the brain have noticed something interesting. Certain regions related to self-reference and rumination quiet down during meditation. This network is sometimes called the default mode network, the part that constantly talks about me, my story, my worries. When that activity softens even slightly, people often report feeling more connected, more at peace, and less trapped by their thoughts. The mystics were pointing to this long ago, using different language. They spoke of archons, twisting perception, of a false world made of fear and separation. We can understand those descriptions symbolically. The archons can be seen as mental loops, emotional triggers, social conditioning, the entire inner machinery that keeps you busy, anxious, and reactive. When you start watching your mind rather than obeying it, you're already stepping outside that machinery. You're like someone in a cinema who suddenly realizes, "Oh, this is a movie. I don't have to respond as if it's real danger." The scenes still play. Emotions still arise. But something in you stays anchored in awareness. You notice when fear is trying to grab the steering wheel. You notice when anger wants to speak for you. You notice when shame whispers old lines it learned years ago. And with that noticing comes a new kind of choice. You can still feel everything fully. You simply stop confusing the feeling with your identity. I feel fear becomes very different from I am a fearful person. I feel sadness becomes very different from my life is meaningless. I feel anger becomes very different from I am an angry being. Slowly, the spell breaks. The matrix loses its grip, not because the world changes overnight, but because your relationship to it transforms. News, comments, opinions, trends, conflicts, these no longer enter you in the same way. You can care deeply without drowning. You can take action without hatred. Jesus hinted at this when he spoke of being in the world, but not of it. Aware, present, compassionate, but not hypnotized. And that leads us to the final layer: your choices. 3. Choices, from automatic reaction to aligned action. The more you rest in awareness, the clearer life becomes. Not easier in terms of events, but simpler in terms of direction. You start to feel a quiet inner sense of yes and no that doesn't come from fear or desire. Yes feels open, grounded, alive. No feels steady, calm, and clear. This is how the monad moves through you, not through thunder, not through fear, but through a quiet inner alignment. You may find yourself making different decisions, saying no to work that drains your soul, even if it looks impressive, leaving conversations that constantly pull you into gossip or bitterness, choosing rest over constant productivity when your body needs it, apologizing when you notice you spoke from ego, not presence, taking a risk that feels aligned, even when the outcome is uncertain. From the outside, people might say, "You've changed." From the inside, it feels more like, "I've finally come home." Interestingly, modern psychology has observed that people who have a strong sense of inner purpose tend to handle stress better. They bounce back more easily from difficulty because their identity is not completely tied to external events. This inner purpose is not always a grand mission. Often, it is simply a felt sense of living in truth, moment by moment. You start asking different questions. Not, "How do I look?" but "Am I honest with myself?" Not, "Do they approve?" but "Is this aligned with my deepest knowing?" Not, "How do I stay safe?" but "What is true right now?" This doesn't make you reckless. It makes you sincere. And sincerity, lived consistently, turns your life into a quiet spiritual practice, even if no one around you uses that language. Practices for living as a portal of the monad. Let's bring this down to daily steps you can actually use. 1. The 3-breath reset. Several times a day, pause and take 3 slow breaths. On the first breath, feel your body. On the second, notice your thoughts. On the third, ask silently, who is noticing all of this? This simple reset brings you back from the matrix of mental noise into awareness, even in the middle of work, conflict, or stress. 2. The heart check-in. Before making a decision, small or large, place your hand on your chest for a moment and ask, "Am I choosing this from fear or from clarity?" If fear is driving you, don't rush. Give yourself space. You might still need to act, but at least you're conscious of the motivator. Over time, you'll sense how choices from clarity feel lighter and more steady, even if they involve difficult conversations. 3. Silent time with no input. Every day, try spending a small amount of time without any external input. No phone, no music, no scrolling, no podcasts. Just you, your breath, and awareness. In the beginning, it may feel boring or even uncomfortable. That's normal. The nervous system has gotten used to constant stimulation. But as you stay with it, something soft opens. You begin to hear the quieter layers of your being. This is where the still, small voice speaks not in words, but in a gentle sense of direction. 4. The Archon spotting practice. Whenever you catch yourself in a repeated emotional pattern, jealousy, resentment, self-hatred, treat it as an inner Archon, a program, not as your core self. Say inwardly, "This is a pattern. I see you. You're not in charge." By relating to it this way, you separate awareness from the pattern. You can feel it fully without letting it define your reality. 5. Living parables. You don't need to read ancient texts to apply this. You can turn your own life into a kind of parable. When someone hurts you, ask, "What is this moment teaching me about my own reactions?" When you feel drawn towards silence, ask, "What is trying to come through me if I stop pushing?" When you feel small, ask, Which story have I started believing again? These tiny questions open subtle inner doors, the same way parables once did for those who listened closely. The hidden cost of staying asleep. It's important to say this clearly. Staying asleep is not neutral. It has a cost. The cost is years of repeating the same emotional cycles. The cost is living by fear while calling it being realistic. The cost is shrinking your inner world to fit other people's stories. The cost is dying with the feeling that you never really lived as yourself. The systems of control, whether religious, social, or mental, only survive when people agree to forget who they are. The moment you start to remember, something shifts in the field around you. Your presence becomes different. Your choices become different. Your relationships begin to rearrange. You don't have to preach, convince, or argue. Your state of being itself starts to speak. This is why so many teachings were hidden or coded in symbols. Not to keep them exclusive, but because this kind of transformation can't be forced on anyone. You cannot wake someone who still loves their dream. You can only live awake and let your life be an invitation. The real meaning of IAA. When Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am," he wasn't giving a philosophical riddle for theologians to debate for centuries. He was pointing to the timeless presence behind all stories, all identities, all roles. I am is not just a phrase. It is the quiet recognition of existence itself. When you say, "I am," and simply rest in that, without adding this or that after it, something profound happens. I am wealthy or I am poor. I am spiritual or I am broken. I am a sinner or I am a saint. All of these are labels. They rise and fall. But I am before all labels. That is where the monad touches your human life. That is the flame no empire could extinguish. That is the light no matrix can fully cover. That is the throne that was never in the sky, but in the human heart. And when you live from there, you don't have to claim superiority, status, or spiritual rank. In fact, humility becomes natural. You simply know, I am part of the source, and so is everyone else. From that knowing, kindness flows without effort. Courage appears when needed. Silence feels safe, not empty. You move through life like a calm flame, walking through a world of flickering shadows. So where does this leave you right now, after hearing all this? Not with a doctrine, not with a new belief system, but with a simple invitation. Tonight, when the noise settles and you are alone with yourself, take a breath, close your eyes, and ask, if I stop seeking outside for a moment, what is already here within me? Stay with that question, not with the mind's answers, but with the silence that follows. That silence is not empty. It is full of presence. It is the monad, the source, the I am gently waiting for you to remember. You are not just a visitor in this world. You are awareness wearing a human form. So let me leave you with this final reflection. If you truly lived each day, knowing that the same presence that moves galaxies also lives in your chest, how would you speak, choose, and love starting today? And are you willing to take one small step toward living that truth right now?